Hey, it's Chris Schmidt with the Average Joe Sports Show, episode 46. Big Ten Media Days just around the corner.
I'm Gary Sharp. We'll talk about the 24 team, but Nebraska has a focus on what's coming in 25.
Hi, everybody. It's Bill Doleman. Nebraska has a bye on October 12th, but that still could be the biggest day of the upcoming college football season.
And it's Elijah Herbel here. It's been a couple weeks. We have to go back a little bit. We'll talk the Evan Cooper news and John Butler, the new defensive backs coach at Nebraska.
Welcome to it, episode 46 of the Average Joe Sports Show podcast. That's Gary Sharp, Bill Doleman, Elijah Herbel, Chris Schmidt, and we are just a few days away from Big Ten Media Days in Indy. We'll be venturing that way, and a lot of storylines to get into. Fellas, a lot's gone on since, let's hold our hands up. We all kept 10 digits after the fourth. And we'll get a much-needed X-ray tomorrow to see how the bionic ankle is doing. Was out on a golf trip / mission last week, so it's good to reunite with all you fellas. Doleman, how's SEC country?
SEC has been good, as expected. Nice, warm, hot, muggy, humid. But I'll be heading back to the friendly confines of Nebraska very, very soon. But I am interested in how in the hell do you make golf a contact sport?
So it's nice of you to ask. So I'm playing.
And it better be a good story, bro. And if it's not a good story, make it up.
No, it's brutal. It's
kickboxing match on the golf course. He got into a beef with a guy.
No, I was with my Uncle Morris, who's a pastor. And my cousin Jeremy, I'm driving along. There's carts stacked. We've all been to Tiburon before. There's that retaining wall. There's their patio. There's their practice green. So we make the turn after 9. Go in. We're going to get a beer and a hot dog. No drop of alcohol. I promise you, Doleman and Sharp and Elijah. And I just got a little close. Are we all danglers at one time in our life or another with our feet outside the golf cart?
No.
But in the warms, no, not now. So I get a little too close to the wall. It scrapes the wall, my foot. It rips my golf shoe. It sticks, pulls, and it's a busted ankle. Now we'll see if the front of my foot's also busted. That thing's swollen. It looks like Frank Beamer's neck. So.
Well, wow. Did you at least look cool while doing it? 'Cause that's the big plus about hanging your foot out the golf cart is how cool you look. Did you look cool while doing it?
Until it caught. And I just kind of said some words, got scraped up, started bleeding a little bit, hopped over to the bathroom to take a pee. And then by the time I got done doing that, it was swollen and huge, and it was time to head to Nebraska Ortho and get into their walk-in clinic. We have a boot. I've got a boot. There's no spurs on the back of it, Bill, and Sharpie. So we're okay. But that's what happened. And
okay. What else you got?
Non-refundable trips last week to Western Nebraska. Played 5 out of 7 days, and you've all played golf with me. I hit them farther and straighter than I ever have. So I even shot a 93 last week.
Wow. Well done. You got to come up with a better story than that, but okay. I hope you're on the mend. I hope you're doing well.
There was a rogue raccoon and alligator that were fighting. I jumped in the middle to save an endangered species in the middle of those two quarreling. And I ended up with this broken ankle.
No, you got to go with something cool. Like you saw a radio rival from a neighboring state that you've been beefing with since college on the course. And it was on site for you guys. And you got him with a nasty it was a head kick. It was a head kick. You knocked him out cold, but you broke your ankle doing it. But you won the fight. That's a cool story.
It's like the bar fight where the guy wins, but he busts his hand, right, Sharpie?
Yeah, similar.
Yeah. I mean, it all makes sense. I mean, just embellish it.
See the other guy.
The bar fight with the bus, was that a Peter story? One of the Peter brothers, I feel like that happened to.
A bar fight?
No, that was practice. That was practice taking a swing at someone with a helmet on. So
well, I was playing golf one time down in South Carolina, and this did not end up in injury, but could have been much worse. So we're on the tee box. I'm with a group of 5, but of course I was with like 10 guys, 8, 9, 10 guys, something like that on our trip. We kind of bunched up at this hole, so everybody's kind of sitting around for a while. The group tees off. And we're talking about, this is gator country, right? You can have alligators down there on the course. And the 4 or 5 guys go ahead. There's 4 or 5 of us left back, and while we're standing there on the tee box, one of the guys goes over and looks at one of the tee markers, blue, red, white, or whatever, and he goes over because it's just laying there, and it's a gator. Right? It looks like a gator. And so the guy walks over and takes his driver and just smacks it just because it's what we thought was a fake alligator. Right? Until the tail swishes. We immediately went to go hit from the Reds. I mean, we got in golf carts. We got airborne. We're dangling from the side. Whatever we had to do, we were everywhere, scattered about because that thing was live.
Did it attack when animals attack? I mean, did you make video file footage or?
No, this was probably about 10, 12 years ago. So we did not think like everybody else does when something happens that you got to get the camera phone out. But there was potential for carnage because, those things can get agitated and they can get fast, and golf carts don't go fast, So yeah, we hightailed, we all hightailed it, and nobody got penalized for only hitting it to the ladies' tees because that's where we all hit off of. But yeah, live gator on the tee box in South Carolina.
It was safe. Yeah. The red tee box.
You can borrow that if you can borrow that with you want, and that's how you broke your ankle.
Sure, that works well. Sharpie, do you have any massive lie? Doleman fighting the gator.
I mean, when I was living in South Florida, you would see them a lot, but usually they'd leave you alone. Like if they're just crossing the fairway. I have a video somewhere of a gigantic gator that was just crossing the fairway at his own pace. But yeah, it's some people are stupid and they want to mess with the gator.
We thought it was fake. We thought it was fake. We thought it was just like this, this like trademark, like a trademark tee box marker. Like, yeah, look at that, and smacks it in the tail.
I don't have any great wildlife stories other than I once played in the Boomers golf event in Fremont.
That's wildlife of another kind, but
may it rest in peace.
if you know, you know. I've never been more distracted on a 5-foot putt.
Schmidt, did I ever tell you about
and I didn't know which hole it was supposed to go in.
And you never miss long.
Clown's mouth.
It sure was that size.
Schmidt, did I ever tell you about the time I actually almost got into a fight on a golf course last summer? We're out playing, which course was this? I think it was Hidden Valley. And this group behind us decided that we weren't playing fast enough, and they decided to hit into us. And I was playing with a friend, bit of an instigator. So he decides to turn around and yell at him, like, what the hell are you guys doing? And they're yelling back, talking shit, saying like, you guys need to play faster. So we start kind of walking towards each other. And about halfway there, I realized, I know these guys. And we all knew each other. And we were all like, cool. So we get up like, never mind. Sorry about that, guys. And
you guys need a beer?
Yeah, we had a good time the rest of the day. Shout out to my buddy Jackson. He was just playing behind us with his buddies. And turns out we all knew each other. So the what could have been a hairy situation was negated by the fact that we all knew each other. And we got a little bit lucky there. But that's the closest I've ever been having a cool golf course story.
Better story would have been throwing the flag on 18 like a javelin. And really frightening that group hitting India. So Hey, there's the horror stories from the golf course. Big Ten Media Days, fellas. We'll dive into the secondary position that's been filled as well. It's the Average Joe Sports Show, Spotify and iTunes, where you can download the podcast. The Average Joe Sports Show on YouTube. AJ Sports Pod. Follow us on Twitter. Gary Sharp, Bill Doleman, Elijah Herbel, Chris Schmidt. So it is Big Ten Media Days in Indy Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Nebraska goes Wednesday. Ohio State is a Tuesday draw. And then you've got USC and UCLA also Wednesday. You'll have Oregon and Washington on that Thursday. But let's talk buzz level, because it's just going to be interesting this season with the Big Ten. You've got two teams that are playoff bound. The world of college football thinks with Ohio State and Oregon. And who else is coming with them potentially? And, where's Nebraska at? Nationally, Sharpie, they've gotten some good preseason pub from some of the national talking heads. And we'll see what that volume's like on Wednesday next week.
Oh, I think it'll be matched. Now, Matt Rhule won't be the headliner by any means, but he's a good interview, as we all have gotten to know. He's the best PR coach that Nebraska athletics has ever had. I think he will set the right tone for what are the expectations this season and how much they're different from the last time they walked off the field. He's a good interview, and I think it's opened the door for more national people to take a second look at Nebraska and go, okay, 5-7 last year, quarterback issues. They've upgraded at wide receiver. At some point, the misfortune of finding a way to lose one-score games is going to change. So I think there'll be a positive vibe. I think this is, from the time camp opens up, from the 1 month from July 31st to August 31st, there will be good vibes surrounding Nebraska. And it'll be up to the football team to continue those once the season begins. But they'll get a lot of love next week in Indianapolis. What I'll be curious, guys, is when these preseason polls come out that are, the Big Ten never does one, but when the Cleveland Plain Dealer or the Athletic or one of those does one where they have all 18 teams that are represented by a media member, where is Nebraska at? Are they with USC, behind USC? Are they ahead of Wisconsin? Are they behind Iowa? Are they in that second tier? That's what I'll be curious to see. And that'll give me an impression of what I think people think of Nebraska outside of these borders for this upcoming season.
I'm looking at the schedule, and Nebraska's going the same day as Iowa. So Kirk Ferentz will have, his headline with Brian no longer being his OC, so that'll be that. But there's nothing dynamic about Kirk Ferentz. Jonathan Smith's the newbie. Rhule and Franklin apparently are going back-to-back. Penn State head coach James Franklin. Well, he's an affable guy. He's a terrific interview. He's a good dude. There's got to be pressure on Penn State this year more so, and I'm wondering if we'll sense that or people will talk about it on Wednesday. He's going after, if this schedule is correct, he's after Rhule. But Penn State, with Michigan having a change at coach, and he's been there, a decade now?
11.
I wonder what the people like the guy, but will there be okay, Harbaugh's gone, can you make the move? Because that's going to be a theme for Penn State all year. So you might get a sense of that. That might be the theme for them. Then you've got UCLA and Deshaun Foster and Lincoln Riley, who is public enemy number one by Paul Feinbaum's estimation. That guy just has been relentless on Lincoln Riley all year. And, he's going to have pressure on him. So I think that if you're looking at somebody who's going to have a fairly relaxing day and could own it, it's going to be Matt Rhule on Wednesday. You've got a new coach, you've got a dull coach, you got one with some pressure, another new guy, and Lincoln Riley. So why wouldn't Matt Rhule be able to be the headliner on Wednesday?
He personality-wise and the ability to communicate, for sure, he could and may very well wow everybody. That said, I think Rhule just wants to shut up and train, shut up and coach, and just stay not even under the radar, but he's real big about earning it, right? So the tone has been a bit muted, which is okay for this team, about just getting better each day. I know that's boring, but that's what they need to do. And he's he's been like that. He's made his rounds on different national podcasts, and he's found a way to say really nice things and positive things and exciting things for Nebraska football fans, but in a, I don't want to say understated, but a non-Kool-Aid way.
Well, and
is the best way to put it.
There's a difference between impressing at media days and being the story of media days. It's good to impress. It's never good to be the story of media days. Especially
he won't be that story. He'll be the guy that everybody likes listening to.
Well, because you think back, like last year, the story of media days was Northwestern and Fitzgerald and car washes in Kenosha. Like, don't want to go there. You go back 2 years ago, and the story was a little bit Scott Frost getting up there, being first, and being like, I don't have an opening statement. What are your questions? Like, he seemed ill-prepared. Like, I don't think being the story
what is this
of
opening statement you ask about?
Well, Elijah's right. You think of like the last 2 times Nebraska's been at Big Ten Media Days. The one 2 years ago where Mike Leach had 7 words in his opening statement, Frost had 0. And we got past that. You think about last year, though. So Rhule hadn't coached a game. Remember what happened on campus in Lincoln a couple of days before he made his debut at Media Day?
Was that Eric Gilbert?
It was the training table shutting down and the volleyball team and that whole thing. And then Rhule, the day before he showed up in Indianapolis, had the famous photo, took care of him for breakfast. So then he gets to Indianapolis. And, oh, by the way, in that crew was Jeff Sims, who a month later, our opinion of him would change drastically. But they get there and they know that one of their assistant coaches had been picked up for DUI in Lincoln. And then the day that Rhule is speaking, remember the lady from Wisconsin, who we think she was from Wisconsin, asked the question. Rhule was not the head coach. Frost was the head coach. The last time Nebraska played at Wisconsin, they kneeled on the field after the game at the 50-yard line and prayed, the players that stick around and do that. And then the next day, there was the tragedy in Waukesha. And you remember the lady asked the question to Rhule about the incident and praying, and if that'll still be part of the culture of Nebraska football, and how great he handled it. So Nebraska has not had like any normal last couple of years of Big Ten Media Days, and I don't expect also Troy Dannon to be standing at the 10-yard line in Lucas Oil Stadium surrounded by media making his win prediction for the year like Moose loved to do in Chicago.
Moose was great. Moose would buy you a beer and just hold
Say no more.
Great's one way to put it.
It didn't have to be at Big Ten Media Days.
No, I know, but it just tasted better from him. The Moose.
Could have been a Tuesday in downtown Lincoln.
Bill, we need you to go.
Oh yeah, well, great's one way to put the Bill Moose tenure. That's one way.
No, he was
great guy, great, affable,
yes.
life of the party type.
Sure. No, absolutely. Now, what do you guys think of Oregon though? I mean, with the attention, with them coming in, and most folks aren't blinking that they'll be able to adapt and thrive. They're going to be picked second, maybe first, but probably behind Ohio State second. And this could be a team that's as ready for the Big Ten to go in and kill it for the first time since that Kijana Carter Penn State team. The Big Ten hated that 30 years ago when they came in and went undefeated, finished second to Nebraska. But the Big Ten and Oregon, I think Oregon can go play in any league because of what Dan Lanning's got and what they do.
Well, they're the way they're recruiting, and he brought an SEC mentality to Eugene. I mean, they're loading up on talent. The biggest issue, and it's great that this year we get Oregon and Ohio State playing out in Eugene, is what does Dan Lanning do in game? That's the question in this league is in game. One of the things that I worry and will be very curious to see in year 2 is Rhule's game management, which he wasn't very good last year, and their situational play calling didn't match what was going on at the time. And I'll give them a pass because that might have lined up with the quarterback in changing their plan. But they got to be better with the headsets this upcoming year. But how many guys in this league would you take and simply say, that guy, because he's on the headset, is going to win a football game. Go way back. Tom Osborne, you could say that. On the headset, Tom Osborne single-handedly could win you a game. You have an abundance of talent, but he was good in game management. How many coaches in this league are exceptional in game management? That's where the only hang-up I have with Oregon is that. But, man, they got Dylan Gabriel. They've got speed all over the place. They are cocky. They got swag. And they are more built to have success in the Big Ten than USC is. And I didn't think I'd be saying that a couple of years ago. And, oh, by the way, this time last year when we were at the Big Ten Media Days, we didn't know that Oregon and Washington were joining the league. Remember, it was just USC and UCLA.
Yeah, it was a couple, 3-4 days later, and Washington and Oregon are like, yeah, we'll come in at 50%. It's better than the alternative, because that's what the Big Ten did. You got them at 50% discount from a rights standpoint. You're only having to shell out half of what you paid USC and UCLA. That's a good question, Sharpie, with who would you take from a headset standpoint in the Big Ten? I think Ferentz, more times than not, they get it done. They figure it out, and they're not always the most talented team. Jonathan Smith, I know he's jumping leagues, but he was really, really good at Oregon State. They had no business punching above their weight class like they did in his short time there. They were in every ball game, and it wasn't even close from a recruiting profile between them and Oregon, them and Washington, and those were one-score games. You just got out-talented. Those are more so Ferentz. I think Fickle's pretty damn good. You've just got to match your personnel with your philosophy. We'll see if that's more of an instance in year two on offense. And I think Rhule can get there, but is it going to be Rhule being hands-off on the sideline and letting his coordinators coordinate, or is he going to step in more and make the decision if he's unsure, if there's an instance where, the offense may not be doing or performing like he wants them to do in a certain situational moment?
There were some things last year, game management can take on a whole magnitude of things there, but timeouts, clock management in the last minute of a half or at the end of the game, use of timeouts. It's one thing to call plays at a certain time and understand how defenses are reacting or offenses are reacting to you, and when to call whatever play. Like, let's not call a 5-yard slant on third down when the ball's being run and you're playing Maryland. And anyway, that's not good, play calling management. But, there were some elementary things where people watching the game from their armchairs or from their chairs, you're going, why are we not calling a timeout here? And then Rhule might say something after the game like, I probably should have, not wasted so much time. And you're like, that seems pretty elementary at times. But I want to get back to Oregon. I'm looking at their schedule here. The date, maybe the date in college football is October 12th, because that's when they play Ohio State in Eugene. And I don't think their schedule is necessarily like welcome to the Big Ten, like Nebraska was welcome to the jungle when they joined the conference. They have UCLA on the road in early September or late September. Michigan State's at home with Jonathan Smith going back to Oregon. Then they've got the date at home against Ohio State, go on the road at Purdue, Illinois back home, at Michigan, who figures to be down after last year. Maryland won't be easy, but down. Maryland at home, Fickle and Wisconsin in Madison, and then they end with Washington, who's not going to be the same team it was a year ago. But that date on October 12th against Ohio State in Eugene, not in Columbus. I mean, they would have made Nebraska play back-to-back games in Columbus, right? So they get the Buckeyes at home. How well their season goes really depends on what happens that day. Because if they get throttled at home by what's supposed to be the best Buckeye teams, their season might take a bad turn.
God, and I wish they were playing Wisconsin, like a Bielema-led Wisconsin team in November. Because they're playing Wisconsin in November, but it ain't the same as playing like a Bielema Wisconsin or a Christ Wisconsin that's just going to run
phone
down
booth
your
game.
throat. Yeah, like that would have been a fun welcome to the Big Ten type game late in the season whenever you're potentially playing for a right to play in the conference title game. that would have been more fun. But I'm with you, Bill. Like, Ohio State game's going to be big for their season, but you could have Ohio State and Oregon realistically match up 3 different times in the upcoming season.
They've split. It wasn't that long ago, 3-4 years ago, that they did a home and a home, and Oregon won at Ohio State, and then Ohio State went and won at Oregon. But I'll say this about Oregon: they're non-conference. They have Boise. They host Boise, but Boise's not necessarily an easy task for a non-conference. They also have to do the Civil War relatively early in the season. I think they host Oregon State, depleted Oregon State. Trent Bray under the
they're at Oregon State there.
They're at Oregon State. So that Civil War is going to be a pain in the ass. Throw the preseason rankings out. So they'll be tested more so than a lot of times by the time they host Ohio State.
Yeah, they're prepared to move into the Big Ten. I mean, they're going to be a problem. I mean, they're recruiting unbelievable right now. So they just keep adding. And you also got to remember, looking at Oregon past this year, and do they have staying power? They got an 86-year-old guy who has more money than God that wants just one title before he passes away. And he'll tattoo the swoosh all over his body to get one title. And they don't hide the fact that they have Nike money for NIL. So Oregon's trying to buy a championship, and they're really scary if they get a breakthrough and they get to the playoff this year, and maybe they're hosting as a champion or they win a game. I mean, I wouldn't want to go to Eugene in December to play.
No.
I wouldn't want to go to Eugene actually September or October, November to play.
Not this year.
No, I mean, it's 40,000, 45,000 of pure throat, man. I mean, they got
more than that, don't they, at Autzen now?
Maybe 50, but it's intimidating. They have a great home record. They're pretty solid.
They're putting in temporary bleachers, the metal ones.
How is Uncle Phil's health?
54,000, Schmidt. You were about on the nose. I thought they were closer to 60.
Hey, that game, it hit before you had a chance to, realize where you were at. It was 42-7. That was a great atmosphere in 17 out there. That was a day game. I would love to see a night game there, but man, they crank it up. Once that duck rolls out on the motorcycle and the team runs out in the uniforms, and you go, whoa, that's pretty damn cool. And then it's 42-7, and you're like, well, maybe it's not so cool. And Justin Herbert is just ripping you apart.
Yeah, that was a bad first half. So we've got Oregon. Yeah, we got Oregon, and then there's Ohio State. You mentioned, Bill, the pressures of best team money can buy this side of SMU, and it's now legal. It's
let's hear the secrets now. Come on.
It's
Craig James, Eric Dickerson, Lance McElhaney. What the hell went on? All right. Maybe you need to go. Maybe you need some more money,
Well, you've got talent in that quarterback room. You've got Will Howard that's there. You got the running game. You got the O-line. You got the skill guys. Defense is legit. They should roll Michigan this year. They need to. Otherwise, their head coach will be needing more beard dye. And you have the Michigan, but let's be honest. It is going to be about getting back to Indy for Ohio State. It's going to be about where they're seated. Because I think Oregon and Ohio State, they'll be in the playoff. Do they get buys? Do they host? Where are they going to be slotted? But they're built for an 11-win, 10-win regular season. You get double-digit wins in the Big Ten. Moving forward with this expanded playoff, you're in.
Yeah, and I think a 9-3 season in the Big Ten and the SEC will be looked differently from here on out, because you could be 9-3 and make the playoff.
Yep,
I think so.
Just like the NFL.
Well, but you have two. We basically have the power two, and you have 12 slots. One goes to a group of 5. You have 2 other conference winners. I mean, the SEC and the Big Ten are going to at least get 3 in. Sometimes they'll get 4 in. But if you're 9-3, I think you have a case to make it. So you're basically the 2 teams that'll play in the championship game in the Big Ten are probably going to be into the playoff.
It's for the bye.
Yeah, because you'd be the 2 top teams. So I don't know. The more I think about it, and I was happy with 4. The one thing that 12 does for college football is it gives you hope. There are more teams that are beginning practice at the end of this month that have hope that they can end up in a playoff. Like Ole Miss. Ole Miss, for example, should be pretty good. But Ole Miss in a 4-team playoff probably comes up short. Now in a 12-team playoff, they got hope. They could drop 1 or 2 games and their season is not over. So there's more teams that have hope that they could be in the postseason, which I think is ultimately good for college football. But man, there's going to be so much politicking going on and trying to figure out tiebreakers and everything like that. I mean, it's college football chaos is what it's going to be. But I think we'll look at even around here, Nebraska gets over the hump and starts to stack successful seasons. We will probably look much differently at a 9-win season than we did under Bo. We won't be celebrating September 4th anymore. We'll be like, you know what? Let's have a party on September 4th. 9-4 is a pretty good record.
Yeah.
Well, and you talk about like teams that probably go into fall camp with hope. Well, I think there is an argument to be made that you could look completely differently upon Bo's tenure had he been playing in the 12-team playoff era. Things could have gone very differently for him, especially you look at like 2009. That defense getting into a college football playoff at 12-team, you go, what could have happened there? But I digress. A team that I think could have some hope going into this season in terms of making a playoff that you don't think about, dare I say, the Iowa Hawkeyes.
Yep.
With what they have defensively, a new look offense potentially. I don't think it's going to be completely revamped, but it might be modernized.
You got a playoff quarterback.
Might be modernized by a marginal amount. You have a quarterback that, as Schmidt said, has played in a playoff before. You get back some tight ends. Like, it's a team that I don't think they're going to light the world on fire offensively, but they don't need to. Whenever your goal is 9-3 or 10-2, Iowa's a team that has a defense that can carry them to 9-3 or 10-2. That's a team that could be going into a season thinking, you know what, we could sneak into the back end of a playoff. I don't think they're even close to being able to win at all. I think there's a wide gap between them.
Schedule's good for them, though. Don't you think, Sharpie?
Say that again?
So the Iowa schedule is good for them.
Yeah, I think that's the same discussion about Missouri, is you avoid some of the big-name teams so you can rack up victories. I think Mizzou's a good team, but they have a chance to be a double-figure win program again. They won 11 last year. I agree with what Elijah said. Phil Steele sneakily has, which is a new word, has Iowa in the playoff, and he bases it, that defense is going to be pretty good. You would think that McNamara, as a veteran guy, would be able to run Tim Lester's new offense. They still have some challenges with personnel. Their offensive line is probably better than it's been, and that's been one of the weird things about Iowa being consistently good of late, is they haven't had the typical Iowa offensive line. But again, back to what Elijah said, their schedule gives you an opportunity to get on a run, and you avoid some of the tougher games. So, even though you don't have divisions where Iowa maybe had benefited from being in the West, I think they have a chance to be 3rd, 4th, or 5th in this league.
Now, getting back to the expanded playoff and the chaos that will probably be ensuing, and again, I don't understand why you don't go to 16. But if you've got it, and I'm a Mountain West guy, had a nice career with the Mountain West. I love the league, and I love the competition in those conferences. But why does there have to be and again, there's no such thing as the group of 5 or the Power 4. Those are made-up terms just like sneakily and trickeration. But anyway, why does a group of 5 have to be in there? That's where you're going to have not just, who's number 13, right? Who's going to be outside the top 12 looking in? And then you're going to have that conversation. Maybe that's why they're in there. How many teams are better than a group of 5 entry into the playoff? Probably 5, 6. We'll all be saying we are better than Fresno State. We are better than San Jose State. We are better than whatever, right? You're basically letting 84 BYU get to play for a national title when they're not as good as any of the big boys who played on New Year's Day in 1985, right? But that's part, I guess, the charm of the NCAA tournament in basketball. It's going to be the charm of college football because you can have the underdog that's going to get in there that's going to win 3 straight games to win a national title. It ain't going to happen, right? Those teams are not going to be competitive enough to win a national championship. And BYU should never have won back in 1984-85 because they couldn't have competed against Oklahoma, but they played like a week and a half earlier in the Holiday Bowl. They're unbeaten, so we got to make them national champions because everybody gets a ribbon when they go unbeaten. the group of 5 is not going to win a national championship.
Well, Bill, I'll just say in my first Dynasty playthrough in college football 25 by EA Sports, Liberty took down Oregon. They advanced to the national title. They lost the national title.
Well, see, that's what I'm saying. They got to win 3 in a row, and they didn't do it, did they? No.
No, but EA Sports might know something that we don't with Liberty playing in the national title game. I don't know.
Uh-huh. Drugs are good. Bill Doleman, Gary Sharp, and Elijah Herbel, Chris Schmidt, the Average Joe Sports Show. Plenty of fun to be had in Indy, cocktail sauce, fillets, and, oh, yes, football as we get ready for Lucas Oil.
I'm not big on the St. Elmo's Fire thing, okay?
I'm not asking you to recite the movie. I'm just saying that the shrimp
cocktail sauce. I'm not into the cocktail sauce.
Oh, it's painful and incredible.
It clears out the pipes. I will say that.
Oh, yeah. Big time. All pipes. I mean, it just canes the hell out of you. It's pretty good. So let's dive into Nebraska's transition in the secondary. Corey Cooper, make that Evan Cooper is no more. You have Mr. Butler. The Butler did it. You get a hell of a safety / passing game defensive coordinator wanting that opportunity at some level since his days in Happy Valley. So Butler's in, Coop out. Sharpie reaction.
Sometimes let's first start with Evan Cooper. It's and this will be one of those questions that will be asked more interest by local media next week in Indianapolis about Evan Cooper. And it's not easy for Rhule. I mean, Corey Campbell and Evan Cooper have been his 2 guys for a long time. There's 2 guys on the coaching staff that are in his inner circle, Cooper and Satterfield. So this wasn't easy for Rhule. But you know what? We've seen it before. Vices get some people in Lincoln. So you have to move on quickly. And Nebraska has made the great transition. In a short amount of time, John Butler in that defensive back room has developed a quick relationship, a relationship built on 2 things. Head down, work hard, love to play football. I love to coach football. If we all work hard, it's going to be okay. I will tell you, in the short amount of time that he has gotten to know his defensive backs, there's starting to be separation. Some guys that maybe have floated through summer and the defensive back room because they have a lot of guys there. They're gonna separate people. Not 24 scholarship guys, 16 freshmen or redshirt freshmen are going to get to play. So they have, in a short amount of time since Butler's been there, they started to separate guys on the guys that are going to play and the guys that want to play. So he's made a quick impression, and he'll fit in really well. This coaching staff, and Rhule's not easy to work for. Rhule's a grinder, man. He is not easy to work for. But if you love to work hard and you love football and you love being around kids and the sport, Rhule's the place for you. And whatever, the culture that he builds. But the one thing I appreciate, because we saw this under Scott, and I know I'm not, changing what I said about he's got 2 guys in his inner circle, because every coach has somebody on their staff that is like their go-to guy. Mm-hmm. The one thing I noticed with Scott is Scott had his inner circle of guys, and then there was Chenander was on the half outside circle, but everybody else, even though they all came from Central Florida, were separated. The one thing I've noticed with Rhule is everybody gets along. They love talking football. I've seen more interaction in the now nearly 2 years that we have seen Rhule at the helm compared to going back a couple of staffs where the offensive and defensive coaches intermingle. You don't see that very often. You see that more on Rhule's staff. And that's why I think a guy like John Butler is making the smooth transition into a room that has more institutional knowledge than him. But it's football. If you can coach football, you can coach football. I don't care if you're in Buffalo or now in Lincoln, Nebraska.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the interpersonal side of things, because it's an analogy I've used here is how many times have you been working a job and it's man, this new hire we brought in, great resume, great experience, great on paper, and then that guy shows up, you're like, this dude sucks to work with. I hate working with this dude. He is the absolute worst. I'm not saying that's going to be the case with John Butler, but that is something that is, whenever you're putting this together late in the offseason, it's something you have to consider. Is just because a guy has a great resume and great on paper doesn't mean he's going to come in and fit into a room. with A, other coaches, and B, the players you have in that room. And then you also have to add in the importance of recruiting in college football. Just because someone's great on paper doesn't mean it's going to be a great hire. That being said, from what I can tell from the outside looking in, it feels like it's a guy that as Sharpie said, lives and breathes football, knows what he's talking about, has a wealth of experience. Like, doesn't mean it's going to work out, but there's a lot of signs that say it will. And I want to go back to something that I don't mean to go back to the Tom Osborne years too much here, but it's Nebraska. We tend to do it. Tom Osborne stipulations when hiring an assistant coach. Because I think John Butler tends to hit a lot of these. Let me go back. Number 1, are you a good person? Number 2, are you intelligent? Number 3, are you a great communicator? And number 4, are you a master of the skills and techniques of the position you coach? Whenever you go through those 4, which is what Tom Osborne laid out as what he used as his criteria for hiring an assistant coach, it feels like John Butler hits all 4 of those. And I think that's a positive sign for what he brings into the room. He steps into a tough position. You got a lot of work to do at corner. You got to make sure you're a guy that can get through to Tommy Hill just as well as Evan Cooper did. You got to figure out the opposite corner spot. You got to figure out what the hell you're going to do with Malcolm Hartzog. There's a lot of questions in that defensive back room, but I think Coach Butler hits all the check marks that you want in an assistant coach, and especially what Rhule wants in an assistant coach.
Well, my first thought is that you and Schmidt somehow make it work. But anyway, I'm not going to. I don't want to give in to speculation. Okay, I think that Matt Rhule had a long time to make this hire. The news of Cooper's resignation was surprising, but I really believe that there was a long period of time that Matt Rhule had an opportunity to sort through who he wanted and talk to a lot of people, probably had his staff in ways reach out and connect, so that while everything happened very, very quickly, from the time the resignation was announced to the time that John Butler's name surfaced, and it took longer for him to actually, I think, get hired than it did for his name to surface as the guy being who was going to get hired. But I think that there was probably plenty of time to do due diligence, to make communication, and to understand that this guy was going to fit in very well with the staff. Now, what that meant, I don't believe that with the players. I think that it's all a very new experience for those guys. I'm curious as to how some guys will be utilized now. Does Hartzog made the move from corner to safety, and then there was the injury, then he was going to move back from safety to corner, and then you've got Jaden Doss moving from wide receiver to corner. Is that something that he still wants to do? That probably all needs to be sorted out, and fairly quickly, if those moves are going to be permanent or not, if those guys fit in with what he wants to do, where they were when Cooper left. But getting back to it, I think that this was a very shrewd hire, and I think it was something that he had time to make before making the announcement.
Question I have for the room is, as much praise as Cooper got, deservedly so, with all his stops along the way with Rhule, as a talent evaluator and guy that, to that point, is the right-hand guy, do you worry about that, or is there enough on staff, on top of the head man himself, knowing what they like, knowing what they see, because they are, as you said, Sharpie, grinders. They are going to exhaust the resources that they've been given to find the best players possible and build up these kids they bring in. Are you worried about those set of eyes that are no longer part of Nebraska football in Cooper?
No, that's a concern. I mean, John Butler was a really good hire. When you do have, John Butler was hired at Nebraska because he was available. Nebraska didn't have. They knew this was a possibility, but in terms of now it's go time to find somebody, they didn't have very long. But availability is everything. So that's how John Butler ends up in Nebraska. And I don't know if Rhule will go deeper into how the whole process worked. But he leaned on a couple of people that immediately recommended him. Mm-hmm. The thing about Evan Cooper, and you cannot go, oh, my God, they got John Butler. I mean, Nebraska's very fortunate that they were able to get a guy in terms of a deeper resume as an upgrade. But you lose that institutional knowledge. And, Schmidt, you made a great point. Hit the eyes. The best talent evaluator in the recruiting room was Evan Cooper. When guys needed to change positions, Cooper was consulted. And that's something that you're going to have to find somebody you trust to make that evaluation, because Matt Rhule put a lot of trust in Evan Cooper to be the evaluator. And Coop was good in terms of recruiting and quickly building relationships. I think John Butler, you're selling the brand. You know, they're trying to make the transition of not selling the position coach or the head coach. I'm selling the brand, but you just need somebody who's good at communication. And I think that's where Butler also stood out when they were going through. I imagine they probably didn't talk a lot of X's and O's when they were breaking it down. They were talking more philosophies and things like that.
Well, let's dive into the angry stepchildren, and they've kind of ruled the ACC at different points and times in the college football world. But Clemson and Florida State, not happy. No shock there. Clemson and Florida State suing mom and dad. And turns out that the grass may not be greener because, you know, that grass is on fire. Nobody wants us. Well, Clemson's kind of off to the side, but Florida State for sure has been given the Heisman, the other kind of wrong Heisman by the commission, the SEC. There's some leaks out about the Big Ten not liking how disruptive Florida State is. And, oh, yeah, the Big 12 comes off the top rope with a steel chair and says, I don't know about you. Who'd have thought? Who'd have thought with where Florida State is, playoff team almost, and a team that's playing at a high level to the tune of 10, 11 wins a year, that they may have to just suck it up and stick it out in the ACC if that's still possible in a year.
Or go to a group of 5, dominate the AAC, and get that playoff spot every year. There you go, Florida State.
But from a that's even less money in the AAC than they're getting now.
You get to the playoff
in the ACC.
See, I think timing is everything. ESPN is not a faucet of cash, so they're not going to give the SEC more money because they add Florida State.
Right.
They've kind of hit their ceiling. We don't really know that yet with Fox. Like, what is Fox's ceiling in terms of money? But if Fox wants Florida State in the Big Ten, they'll be in the Big Ten. I think Fox wants North Carolina and Notre Dame in the Big Ten ahead of Florida State and Clemson. And I think Florida State, just based off what Greg Sankey has said this week, man, they showed their hand, and their hand isn't very popular. I mean, Greg Sankey basically took the spear and killed the horse. I mean, that's essentially what he did this week. But isn't it wild to think that people don't look at Florida State as added value?
It's stunning. If they
got a national championship, somewhat recently.
But it is stunning to think that if they can't get into the SEC, that's just the neighborhood. Now that might be Florida saying no. We've all heard that South Carolina will not allow Clemson to get in. Georgia doesn't want Georgia Tech in the SEC. All that, not that they bring a lot of value, but those teams that already have their flags planted and their roots under them, they've got a lot of say and sway as to who gets into those conferences anymore. And for the SEC, you're right, Gary, they're not going to just give more money just because somebody else came in. Nobody wants to slice up the pie. The only whale that anybody wants anymore, for the most part, is Notre Dame. And then probably after that, you throw in North Carolina. And after that, I don't know who 3, 4, 5, and 6 really, really are in terms of value. And basketball doesn't mean anything, right? It's all football.
But Jordan Brand, Carolina, academically, if you're a wine and cheese crowd, Duke, right?
You rule North Carolina, right? You don't have to take Duke. Duke's a basketball school. North Carolina State's already in the ACC. They're not going anywhere. North Carolina is coveted because it is the institution in that state, much like South Carolina is the flagship institution in that state. That's why they can say no to Clemson. University of Florida, there's a lot of big schools in that state, but it is still the state school. So they have a little bit of sway in those arguments, especially when you're talking about bringing somebody in and dividing up the pie a little bit more. Now, if Notre Dame goes to the SEC or goes to the Big Ten or to the Big 12, they'll gladly welcome them and they'll slice up the pie if they have to do it. But other than Notre Dame and North Carolina, I don't know who else those conferences really want.
The thing is, I do think Florida State adds some value for TV networks. If you have Brent Musburger on the call and they go to crowd shots, Florida State gives you something that Notre Dame does not give you.
Jen Sturger graduated a long time ago.
It brings out a new side of Brent, though. The Catholic girls don't do that for Brent.
Fair enough. Well, we'll see where it shakes out, Indy bound, and we'll see the Nebraska buzz. And last thought here, couple minutes, recruiting. Sharpie, going to turn to you on the recruiting topic as we tape on a Thursday night. Some smoke out there for maybe a 2025 defensive lineman for the Big Red. They're also keeping an eye on that 2026 and 2027 options. The recruiting barbecue coming up at the end of the month. And, of course, Christian Jones still coveted, as is Mr. Hawthorne. 2 linebacker spots Nebraska wants to add for 2025.
Yeah, it's first of all, we talked about the transition from Evan Cooper to John Butler. Don't forget about Jameer Mosey, who is the former high school coach that was added this week and has already hit the ground running in terms of recruiting. What you're alluding to is the Tony White tweet where people lose their mind. We need football so bad. We need to stop looking at coaches' avatars and tweets and overreacting or reacting accordingly. I thought it might have been, and it still could be, Will Hawthorne, who is the linebacker from Gilbert, Iowa, who has Iowa State and Nebraska as his finalists. There were some crystal balls for Iowa State, but most recently he visited Nebraska. There's a 4-star defensive lineman named Cade Petrzak, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. That is starting to pick up speed for Nebraska, getting him. Remember, Jamar Mosey's son is a commitment to Oregon. He's a 4-star wide receiver. Could Nebraska flip him? And he's already been on campus before his dad joined Rhule's staff. And then everybody is looking a month from now, what is David Sanders going to do? The 5-star offensive lineman. Nebraska is one of 4. Most will tell you that Nebraska is the 4th team, but you never know. You got the bag that's starting to pick up, a relationship with 1890. You got to practice on August 3rd. Who knows? It could end up as a nice little flurry before kickoff for Nebraska recruiting. But I think it's Hawthorne or Petrzak is the one that'll commit next.
Mm-hmm. Those are the 2 names.
I'll also say, if you get a hot start to the season, I wouldn't shut the door on Isaiah Mosey, currently committed to Oregon. And something we talked about on this show with unlimited coaches, does the teams ever pull out the old hired dad to try to get a recruit? I'm not saying that's what Nebraska did here, but I don't know. I'm not slamming the door shut on Isaiah Mosey. He had Nebraska, I believe, in his Final Four before he committed to Oregon. He's an Oregon commit now, but if Nebraska gets the season started in the right way, I think there could be some communication there, and I wouldn't close the door on him either.
Well, you got the Raiola effect. If Nebraska gets off to a good start, that kid loves peer recruiting, and if you look, you would be a high school kid that would get at least 2 years with him on the roster. Yeah, that there could be a big pull there. The one thing about Mosey, and maybe you guys have talked about it on your show, and maybe Bill knows the backstory here. It is my understanding that there is a rule that you can't be an analyst and recruit like a family member. You have to be like a full-time assistant coach. And I don't, and so that's another question next week is, what exactly is Jameer Mosey's role? Like, what is his title, on the staff? Because he is out there. Not say out there, but he has made a couple of offers where prospects that Nebraska has offered a scholarship to, they thank him, and he's only been here a week. But that used to be a rule that you could not hire a coach. If you did, they had to be a full-time coach. They couldn't be like an analyst and recruit a family member.
I don't know the specifics. I do know that his turnaround at Lee Summit was big time. He had the top defensive lineman in the country a year ago, went to Missouri, and not only has he coached or had relationships with some of the top talent in the Show Me State, but he's networked around the state. And to get back into Missouri would be a great thing for Nebraska.
I don't know about that analyst deal. I mean, if it's a father-son, that's pretty tough.
That might be the exception.
That might be but I remember back when it was the Vince Dooley and Derek Dooley. Vince Dooley couldn't go watch his son play because it was a recruitable visit or something like that. And that's how the NCAA
stop him.
That's how the NCAA made a rule change. And what power does the NCAA have anymore at all? As far as that goes, but if it's father son, I don't know how they could.
See, I think that, but you can't be an analyst. Like you can't hire if you are recruiting a prospect, you can't hire their father as an analyst. They have to be a full-time assistant coach.
Now, what about the rules recently with the the unlimited staffing now? I mean, I know you can't have specific coaches, but you can have
that's where I don't know if you have to be inside of the 10 or however that works. There's also a rule that is still in place that he can't recruit if he's an analyst, not a full-time on-field coach, so to speak, or however they're going to identify that. He can't recruit his old high school for 2 years.
Oh man.
Yeah, there's some you have to make them a full-time person. They can't be just they're sitting at the kids' table during meetings just so you can get kids from his high school or his son. They put those rules in, and I'm not sure how they change it. The other thing to think about recruiting guys is I think we're going to get a ruling before the year begins of what the roster limit moving forward is. So that may also impact, Nebraska's recruiting class, and how large they're going to be.
105 was thrown out there, and I think that's brutal. That's idiotic.
And I think that's where it's going to be, is 105. And then it'll be, okay, what is the lead into that? Because Nebraska still has a relatively large roster. And you can't, that would be brutal to all of a sudden tell a kid who just got here as a walk-on, sorry, you're out. We're going to ship you off to Kearney. If you go out there and play well, we'll see you in 3 years. Mm-hmm. So I think all those factors are kind of – Nebraska might be in a position, as Elijah was alluding to, if they have some success out of the gate and they're a sexy team and they got momentum and they're a fun program, they might be able to kind of pick and choose recruits they want because knowing their roster is not going to be as large as it's been.
Well, that's just idiotic. And I understand there are parameters and rules in Title IX, but if you can, this isn't the NFL, man. This isn't a 53-man roster. This isn't a 60-man roster. To whittle it down, you should be able to carry as much as you can afford.
Hey, look, this might have something to do with university budgets, not athletic department football, team sizes. It could have something to do with how if athletes are going to be university employees now, how many athletes are you going to put under the auspices of the university payroll system? And they may say, it is a roster limitation because of salary capping to a certain extent, or roster capping, because some schools won't be able to afford to have 200 kids at whatever point. It's not going to be an immediate thing, but at whatever point these athletes become university employees at Nebraska or at Wyoming, where they are going to have certain limitations. At Iowa or Iowa State, one might have limitations. KU, K-State, limitations. They're going to level the playing field the best they possibly can, and they're going to try to keep employee costs down. And then you're going to get unionization involved in all of this at some point. This is a whole huge thing that we're on the precipice of. So they're maybe trying to get a handle on that by saying 105. I think that's low. I think it's a safety issue also. Mm-hmm. I think that those rosters should probably be in the 110 or 120 area, because if you're going to have lower rosters and you're going to have longer seasons, you're going to have more injuries, you're going to have issues. But I think that this is a much bigger picture in terms of payroll and pay to play and all that kind of stuff. That's why they're going to try to get a handle on it with the roster size at first.
And Bill,
listen to the football people, please.
Yeah, listen to the Big Ten. It's the Big Ten and the SEC that are nodding their head as Bill talks about the safety issue that is the 105. I think it's some of the smaller schools look at a 105 as being a potential playing field leveler, and there's probably a little more talent out there for them as well. Your teams that are in I know Bill doesn't like this, the group of five, if you will. But it's the Big Ten, the SEC that look at 105 and say, hell no. But the compromise must be struck somewhere.
Hey, one quick thing that I was thinking about as once next week rolls around, the ACC and the Big Ten have their media days, talking season is over, and we get to open up camp. And all of us have gone over nearly every angle of the offseason. Are you guys surprised that even in spring and now in summer, the in-helmet communication and the 2-minute warning on how it's going to affect teams has not been discussed more? It has hardly been discussed at Nebraska, and you got a guy that came from the NFL, and you've got a quarterback that's a freshman that all of a sudden you're going to have something in his ear, just like the NFL, now that we've gone NFL light. And then how is it going to affect defenses?
Well, defensively, you're going to pull the old Belichick v. the Rams Super Bowl because the communication shuts off at that 15-second mark on the play clock. You're going to jack with your defense so the quarterback doesn't have the test answers in his left ear. That's one way to respond to it. But no, I think not a lot of it's been talked about, but it could be a mess. The first couple of games in college football, if you have a freshman quarterback or a young quarterback, or you have coaches that are not used to that, it could be just a mess. I think Nebraska's got coaches that are for sure used to it, but I think you've got a freshman phenom that's been around the pro game a lot. So if there are questions about it, well, let him tap in.
And maybe that'll be a question next week that'll come up, Schmidt, and it'll be answered, is who is on the other end of the walkie-talkie talking to Rhule? Is it Glenn Thomas, who just came from the NFL, where he sat in a booth and that's what they did? He knows how that communication works.
Make sure T.O. has a walkie-talkie.
This goes back to what you brought up earlier, game management.
The play clock is not 2 minutes.
This goes back to the game management thing and the timeouts and the clock and all that. I think was a weakness in Nebraska's game management. So that goes back to what we started talking about tonight. And I agree with that. But again, you have coaches who have at least experienced it at some point. And I think that the communication in terms of how to communicate, it's not going to be new for a Matt Rhule or a Glenn Thomas. This is how it's going to go. Don't worry about it. And then hasn't some high schools, haven't they been able to have helmet communications? A school like Buford, they haven't had it? Okay.
No, what they have in college football also has this, and this is another huge advantage for the sport, is you have the on the sideline tablets.
Yeah.
I mean, it's becoming the NFL. Mm-hmm. And we'll I think coaches that can are very efficient are going to have a lot of success with all this new technology they have.
I mean, we had tablets on the sideline of our high school football game in 2016
Which is wild.
Did you throw them?
No, I would have gotten suspended if I would have tried that. It was way too expensive.
What did you try to get on the internet when you were watching those online?
You'd watch the film from the previous drive for the most part. Occasionally,
did you get permission, or just push the 18 plus and get away with it?
Here's the thing.
The game, or what?
Elijah can't get it now, so
only in the second half of blowouts, Bill.
It is crazy that it's taken this long to get it to college because, as Elijah was alluding to, I know Creighton Prep, for example, they have a gigantic TV on the sidelines during games that when the offense and defense come over, the coaches get on the TV and they show them plays. But it's taken us this long to get it to college.
Incredible.
You'd have the previous play on the sideline in 20 seconds back in 2016. Yeah, it's wild that it took this long for college football to get with the times.
But do you remember before we got the tablets in the NFL, they would have the printouts of the still shots?
Yep, good old photog work. That'll wind us down for episode 46 of the Average Joe Sports Show. Tell a buddy, like and subscribe on YouTube, the Average Joe Sports Show. At the AJ Sports Pod is where you find us on Twitter. And as always, Spotify and iTunes for the audio version. Gary Sharp, Bill Doleman, Elijah Herbel, Chris Schmidt. We'll talk to you next time right after Big Ten Media Days. So long.